I started feeling like, why am I doing this? I was ready to quit. And I quit maybe like 3 times before continuing, really. And the third time, I was just like I just had nothing more. I lost the purpose that I'm going for. And the only thing within me was this big question mark, why am I doing this?
A few weeks ago, I was having a conversation with today's guest, Zaher Ibrahim. Zaher has lived and worked all over the world. He's a leadership advisor, entrepreneur, and someone who spent his career helping leaders and organizations navigate growth, change, and complexity. But that's not what caught my attention. At one point in our conversation, Zaher reflected on many chapters of his life and career: engineering, leadership development, coaching, entrepreneurship. And then he said something that stopped me. He said, I still don't feel like I've arrived. And honestly, I think that a lot of leaders know exactly what that feels like. You work hard. You achieve goals. You build something meaningful. You reach milestones you once thought would bring clarity. And yet, the question remains, am I where I'm supposed to be? Today, we're exploring what it means to spend a lifetime becoming, whether arrival is even the point, and how we know if we're moving towards significance, purpose, and the work we were actually built for. Welcome to Crafted Clarity. Before we jump into that statement, for those meeting you for the first time, give us the 2-minute version of your journey.
Well, first, thank you, Steve, for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you. The 2-minute version of my journey was starting with a choice that was very conventional, almost not a choice, a default, I would say, of a career path, and then waking up to a day where you can't take it anymore and finding a path that feels is true to who you are and going that path. But the story doesn't end here, as you mentioned, and then that path goes into more and more events and unfolds into more forks along the road, which leads you to, let's call it a dark forest. And in that dark forest, you start exploring more and seeing that there are so many routes that you could take. And in my case, those routes became organization development, executive coaching, leadership development, entrepreneurship. And as you mentioned, all of these different paths are fulfilling. And at the same time, the more I go forward, the more I feel I have more way to go. And that leaves me with more questions than answers. And I'm here with you and with our audience exploring this. Let me stop here and say this is the 2-minute version.
Well, I appreciate that. So you've made a lot of changes, a lot for what people can say, well, you were going down a path, you were finding a level of success, but then something was drawing you to something else. Was it more of a pull towards something else, or were you kind of moving away from a past season?
Thank you for the question. So let me give you 2 examples. So one example is moving from engineering, which was the first career after a bachelor and a master's degree in the States and 3 years of work in the States in the field. Moving from that was a very conscious choice towards answering a question of what do I want? And I found an answer at that time in organization development. So I jumped ship. I consciously made the decision to no more engineering, and I want to follow a path where organization development as a field has this human element and dealing with the organization as an organism. So that element of service to and the humanistic part of the field drew me in. After spending 13 years in that field, I got year after year to another question, which is, as I'm serving the organization, who is serving the human being, the individual behind the role. So working in organization development was very close to working in HR, and HR has directives and have some objectives and projects that serve the employees. But notice they serve the employees. While the human being behind the employee role is not only an employee. And I found at some points that I want to serve that person, but I can't in my capacity in OD and in HR. So that's where I started looking into taking a path towards coaching. And that started the path for me. And I took on coaching and I got certified and I started my work within the corporate, and then I left the corporate and I started my own practice in coaching. 6 years into that, I got to a point where, yeah, coaching is great. You can really transform people, but that's a one-on-one work. And that's somehow elitist. If you can afford coaching, it can reach you. If you cannot afford it, then you're left behind. That led me to another choice, or another question mark, is how can I expand this impact? And that's what got me into leadership development, where when you're working with leaders and teams, it actually changes the whole organization. And it didn't stop there. So after a few years in leadership development, I was the regional director of a US-based development company. I was heading the MENA region, the Middle East and North Africa. And after a few years of doing that, then AI started coming to the picture. And then there was another question: is we know how we do things in our own set way, but the world is changing, and we're not ready for it. How does that look like when we bring in AI into the field of leadership development? So again, I took a step. I went on another degree. This time it was my MBA at MIT, and I wanted to explore that question. I finished my studies, came back and established my current company. And here we are exploring how can we build leadership development on a base of AI. And that's where I am so far.
Yeah, I love the fact that you not only asked yourself questions, but you were pursuing the answers to those questions. So those questions most likely rose up attention that you were trying to figure out what that was about. I mean, I just like the fact that you took action when you had those questions, even going back to school. So what I heard in what you were just saying is that you were still pulled towards making an impact beyond just one person. You wanted to actually impact more people, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes. One thing that I just want to comment on the story that I mentioned of my path. When I say it this way, it sounds like it was well written, well prepared, that the path was just smooth and direct and straight. And in reality, it was nothing like that. The number of fumbles and stumbles that I had across along the way was, to me, was unbelievable. There was like around every corner there was something that went wrong, could go better, and needed to be fixed or needed to be improved. Or so as we're talking about this, and as like there's more, the audience are hearing this, I want just to mention how there were so many dark nights of the soul in this journey, and so many times where I felt like I'm completely lost. I don't know where to go next. And one thing I want to mention here is the question, what do you want? It's such a powerful question that we don't ask ourselves enough. And it's truly one of the hardest questions to answer, if we're being honest with ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
Wanting what you want is by itself an art and a skill that, as we master, our path becomes so much clearer and the hurdles become so much smaller. Steve, you might, I see you nodding, and I think you might remember from your own stories a time when you've been through these hurdles and being uncertain of where you're going. I wonder if you'd like to share some with us.
Well, yeah. And thank you for that. What I heard from you, which reminded me of stories of myself, is that we are pulled into a different direction based on what we feel we're supposed to be doing. And then we embark on that. And now, as we are in this new path, maybe it's an overlap of seasons, we start to wonder, okay, well, am I making the right choice? Am I following what I'm supposed to be doing, based on what I was feeling, based on the answers to the questions that I was asking myself? So for me, my transitions, my seasons, if you will, similar to yours, where I was building things, where I was building my own company after I left a successful career in corporate America, because I felt, instead of working for a company making them more money, I wanted to help the people who they were trying to impact, right? So it wasn't just about building more, amassing more. It was, I wanted to take what I felt was my abilities, my gifts, and to be able to impact people, um, uh, more on a one-to-one basis. So my journey included that. Well, I'm leaving this corporate America job and I'm going to make a difference. And while that started that way, it has changed as I've grown, as the impact that I'm making on others have grown, to a shift. And each time we make a shift, at least for me, it's like, was I supposed to leave? Was I supposed to do this? Or was I supposed to stay where I am and continue to, work hard or build or develop in this area? And I
Hmm.
think, for me at least, where it's really becoming evident is that, I think humans have a tendency to want to dig roots in. Um, Change may be exciting and romantic, but change is also scary. So once we're comfortable in an area, we want to stay there because it's comfortable, right? But I think we're always asked to go deeper. We're always asked to ask those questions of, is this the place I'm supposed to be, or am I supposed to go somewhere else to continue my journey from, and as we say it on this podcast, from success to significance? And in that journey is where I find tension, and that's why we call it the tension between what we built and what we're built for, because we're not always in the place that we're built for.
Oh,
So,
so beautiful. So
um,
beautifully said.
we're always on this journey, self discovery. We are trying to detach things that have attached itself to us. So when we're successful in a job, we think that success is ours, that we own that was because of us. And so when we go to a different season, we're like, okay, well, I brought that with me, but now that doesn't belong here.
Mm.
So what needs to come off so we can continue to move to this next season and bring into the season what needs to be there and leave what was in the past. So
I love what you're mentioning. And this quote, very very memorable. Like the tension between what we've built and what we've built for. And the word tension brings to mind a question that I've been grappling with uh, about purpose. One part of it is about purpose. Like when you set a purpose, do you keep working at it until you reach it? And what happens when you have fulfilled your purpose? And is it supposed to be fulfilled? Versus the notion that, well, once you get on a path towards a purpose, you must be growing as well.
Hmm.
And if you are growing, then your purpose is growing as well. So you're actually setting a purpose that you're not supposed to fulfill because you wanted to keep growing as you are. Um, and I also remembered like the grit, the concept of grit from Angela Duckworth, um, and relate that to what you mentioned in terms of if I'm being gritty with fulfilling my purpose, am I aware of when do I need to change, keep gritty, but towards a new purpose or a shift of purpose?
Hmm.
Um, because in her definition, like of grit, it's sustaining effort towards a long-term goal. Well, that long-term goal is actually shifting. So how do you, it becomes like you're going a path that becomes almost a curve, and you keep going towards that. And that I can just imagine the tension that we have to hold as we
Yeah.
are growing towards
Now,
our purpose.
do you view purpose as a destination or more of a journey?
Well, I think that's the million-dollar question that we're asking here. Um, I view it more as a journey because if it's a fixed, if the purpose is fixed, then um, it has a it sets me in a certain track on a certain track, and I see myself, or I would like to be, ever evolving on a spiral, right? On an upward spiral. So if I'm fixed on purpose, then how am I evolving? The way I make meaning and the way I make sense of the world needs to evolve. I need to always increase my capacity for complexity, and hence my purpose also needs to be um, preceding me on that upward spiral. And hence, I don't see it as one set destination, but as a journey upwards.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if we make purpose or anything really a destination, we then as humans put a timeline on it. Well, I need to go in a straight line and I need to get here by then, by this time. And that just adds to the tension because we have a set idea in our head of what that looks like, what it takes to get there. And then when there is those dark turns, where there is those things that you didn't see coming, then it could throw us off track. And then it could lead us down a path of even questioning whether the purpose is really our purpose.
And we can, for sake of argument, we can say that's all fine and dandy, but what about what you mentioned, both of us mentioned at the very beginning of the conversation, where, oh, you've achieved so many things, but you're still unfulfilled. So now we're saying, like, well, your purpose is not supposed to be achieved. So what happens in between you fulfilling something that is not supposed to be fulfilled and you feeling like unfulfilled yourself?
Yeah.
And I want to tackle that question. So what am I supposed to feel as a leader on my journey? What is a healthy way of being on that journey? And that's a question I am asking myself and yours as we continue the conversation.
Yeah. Are you getting any answers yet to that question?
I think one answer comes from the concept of the gap and the gain. Um, and I think that book is by Steve Chandler, if I'm not mistaken. So the concept of the gap and the gain is if you're measuring yourself by the gap towards your purpose, then you're always in the gap and you're always on a negative downward spiral, actually.
Hmm.
But if you're measuring yourself to where you've started, then you're always going up, and you will see yourself on this upward spiral, and your purpose would only be something that is inspiring for you rather than dispiriting. So it's just, where are you measuring from?
Yeah,
That's, I think, what.
that's a great perspective. Um, yeah. Um, I like the frame of that because it does allow you to make left turns and right turns because you're still measuring the growth and the change. And, you know, as we talk about the distillation process, which is kind of like the core of crafted clarity. It's about the change. It's about the evolution of the ingredients in us, as well as whiskey, but uh, about how we are changing and adapting, moving towards something. So it's not necessarily um, the perfect end. It is that journey along that path. So um, I like to bring up the fact that you have an interesting, a unique perspective because you have been a leader in both sides of the world. In America, as well as right now you are in Dubai. There's a significant gap. We talk about gap between the way American leadership is, which tends to be more of personal success and growth and accumulating things, um, versus the Eastern mindset of leadership. Can you talk a little bit about those differences between the two forms of leadership here, and then how that's impacting you?
Thank you for the question. If you may allow me to, I will use the word difference rather than gap, and in a way that just says that we have different ways to go about leadership, different values. Of course, we have a lot in common, but there are some differences. Those differences we can start by naming them at the culture of individualistic culture versus collectivist culture, more in the East versus individualistic in the West. And as we come from culture to leadership, the way we find that leadership um, is built, and as we know, trust is the foundation of every relationship. Trust is built in the West more on a transactional basis. And what I mean transactional, I don't mean that I need something from you and the relationship is transactional. That's not what I mean. What I mean is trust is built by transaction. If you promise me a certain transaction and you fulfill it, you gain some of my trust. And the more transactions that go into being fulfilled satisfactorily, then the trust is built up and up and up. The one aspect of a market or relationship built as such is that it's a lower barrier of entry. Anybody can do that transaction and start gaining my trust. And it's also allows competition to always be relevant because yes, you have done this transaction or this project or this agreement, and so can anybody else or your competitors. They can prove themselves and come into the arena. In more Eastern cultures, which are more collectivist, trust is built relationally, and the notion of care about the client, like you care about me as an entity or as a person first before we do the transaction. In a way, you have to show me that, and I have to establish that, yes, Steve cares about me, and this transaction will come or not. As we establish that notion of trust, then the continued engagements together will continue building that trust, but now with a very high barrier of entry right from the beginning, because it's not easy to gain the trust. However, later in the journey, competition would be less and less relevant because you've crossed a high barrier and you're way ahead of any competition, that your clients would just come back to you over and over and over because you've gained their trust. So a different way of leadership and relationship within the business realm as it reflects the difference in the culture itself.
So how does that apply to what we were talking about in terms of how you are relational, how you are really trying to, build that impact in what you're doing as a leader?
Well, I would say that um, I, from my aspect, I definitely believe in trust built in the relationship, and I do care actually about my clients, and aside from my transaction, this is just a fact for me. So it's not easy to show that in a culture that is built differently. Maybe it's not as relevant. However, I keep that as an invitation where, you know what, there is a different way or another way of doing this, and maybe you'd be open to it. That doesn't take away from the transaction that needs to happen successfully, but it adds to it. Um, and I find it very interesting when people open up to having a relationship that is deeper than the depth of the transaction itself. Um, I find that if we go back to the Middle East or to Dubai, a lot of fresh Western professionals struggle with that aspect specifically. So they come to the client very ready to do business. Little that they know that the client is not ready to do business until you've done the pre-business due diligence, and that is building the relationship. And I love to. That's part of the coaching that happens specifically in executive coaching on an aspect of effectiveness and efficiency. So let me bring that a little bit because you asked about impact. Um, so many leaders, specifically very successful ones, focus on the aspect of efficiency. I need to fulfill that task to the best I can. This is an achievement. We're ticking the box. We're getting the results. As the well, this is a great way you can do business. Definitely that way, no problem. But this is a 2D aspect of doing business. If you complexify the context of doing business and you add the relationship aspect to it, now it becomes 3D. So efficiency will not get you, like what got you here won't get you there. Efficiency will not get you to the next level. And hence, I invite them to ask, is what you're doing, if it's efficient, is it effective? Of course, the answer is no, but the challenge is getting them to see it. And then we go back from an aspect of, you know what, it's not effective, and hence it's not efficient for you. They love efficiency, we take them back to efficiency. And the most efficient way is to be effective in order for you to go as much as possible in a straight line in your transaction. And that's the impact that I have had this conversation numerous times. And I bring it here to this space because it's such a counterintuitive conversation that just simply at the end of the day makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, and I brought that up because when I talk to leaders, obviously my clients here are in the U.S., so we have that U.S. Western mindset. They do want to be accomplished. They do want that success. That's what they tell me on the outside. But when I talk to them, really what they are struggling with, what that tension is that they want to have meaning. They want to have purpose, which is the difference between between becoming and accomplishing. So on the outside, they're spinning their wheels, they're working really hard to build something, but what's missing is they just want that sense of purpose, which goes back to, what do I need to let go of? What has attached itself to me? And how do I make sure that my focus, um, whatever season I'm in, is helping me along that journey that we talked about? So that's what I'm finding. Is a That's what is underneath a lot of that tension.
Mm-hmm.
So
What?
no, I was just going to ask, in your journey. I mean, you've gone different. You have a progression of what you started out and kind of where you're going towards now. You had talked about that. Um, you know, have you had to learn things about yourself, answering those questions that you were asking yourself, and then as you're moving towards your own sense of significance, I mean, what have you learned about yourself in this journey of where you are right now?
Um, would it be okay if I just mention something before answering your
Oh,
question?
absolutely.
You were mentioning something about the leader in the U.S. and how they are yes, they're looking for accomplishment, but they're also looking for the significance and making meaning of what they're doing. One thing that I noticed, and this is just one man's opinion, I could be very much wrong, is I noticed in the space where those leaders are working and are belonging in terms of also the social aspect, the individual space is so wide that nobody else is expected or allowed to come in. So that's, let's call that person space is 10 meters wide, um, or should be like 10 meter, 30 feet wide. um, so hence, if anybody comes even close to that space, they are crossing me, and they're like intruding or getting into my business. So they're not allowed. That sounds comfortable. And at the same time, I'm also not allowed to come any closer to somebody else. And hence the sensitivity becomes hyper sensitivity. If I'm in any way, shape, or form, um, like stepping on any toe, even from a distance, then there's kind of cancellation that happens against me. Like I'm completely wrong in the most terrible sense. Going back to leaders establishing significance and meaning in a society where this could be a factor, and it's not right, it's not wrong, it's just like an observation, and I could be very much wrong. What emotional support is given is does the individual receive that allows them to celebrate what they are achieving and allows them a kind of collective, I'll call it collective celebration. If my space is so wide and your space is so wide, if my circle is personal space is 30 feet wide and yours is 30 feet wide, we're really, if that's if it's a diameter, or let's just say we are 50 feet apart, that's quite a distance. If in other places on earth where the personal space is much less and you do get people to meddle with your life, and they get into your personal issues and everything. However, when you build something, there's so many people that celebrate you because there's very close. So there's not one way that is better than the other. But if we measure significance, it's so much harder to feel significant, to feel that meaning, because everyone else is so far from you. But with a group hug, and I learned that in my journey to climb Mount Ararat, it was one group hug that kept me going. Literally, nothing else.
Wow. You have to tell me more about that journey there. I mean, not many of us have climbed a mountain.
Mount Ararat is 5,000 meters high. I think that's 18,000 feet. It's a little bit less than Kilimanjaro, but if it's at least as challenging or a little bit more challenging because of the terrain. And on the day, the way you climb is you go from base camp to camp 1, camp 2. You go from, let's say, 2,000 meters high to 3,000, and then from 3 to 4, you go down from 4 to 3, and then climb from 3 to 4, and then you summit on the third or the fourth day. And the summiting is always starts at midnight or very, very late, so that when you're on top, you're in the morning. Because you want to avoid the afternoon weather as you're coming down. So it's such a treacherous journey, summiting. I mean, you've barely had a couple of hours of sleep, and now you need to summit for like 9 hours before coming down. That's just the summiting. And on that day, we had a minus 15 degrees Celsius chill, and that was off a 50 kilometer per hour wind. And I'm sorry, I'm not gonna translate that into the other units, but meaning like in essence, you can just imagine that I was wearing every piece of clothes that I've got with me, plus 3 jackets that I borrowed from others, plus mittens that I borrowed from others on top of my gloves. Like basically, I was a fluff ball going up the mountain because it was so chilly, so cold, and I started getting hypothermic. I was very ready for the climb. I had no altitude sickness. All of that was fine. But the wind chill that we got really threw a curveball at me. And it was a small group, maybe like it was only 6 of us. Out of the 6, I was the most impacted by the chill, and I started getting hypothermic. The treacherous thing about that is that as you go up, there's no other way down. There's no helicopter that's going to come and pick you up. So you have to make your way down. So the further you go, the further you are from your starting point, and the more you're stuck in. So 4 to 5 to 6 hours in, I started feeling like, why am I doing this? I was ready to quit. And I quit maybe like 3 times before I could do it, really. And the third time, I was just like I just had nothing more. I lost the purpose that I'm going for. And the only thing within me was this big question mark, why am I doing this? Every kind of determination just went out. It was just one empty question, why am I doing this? And the guide was such an amazing, lovely Turkish lady. She actually passed away, and I just wish her peace wherever she is. May she rest in peace. She just asked the group to hug and to just pat my body so that to give me some warmth. And that warmth carried me for 3 more hours into the summit. The wind was so strong that we could not stand up on the summit and take the picture. We had to take it sitting. So my summiting picture is actually sitting on the mountain. As people were walking on the mountain and on the very top with the crampons, the wind was so strong that the chips of ice from underneath the crampons would just hit you in the face like nails. It's literally that strong. But we did summit. And I'm here talking about this amazing day, the hardest thing that I've ever done, because the group that I was with cared enough to give me that hug.
Yeah. So what was it about that hug that just transformed the rest of the journey?
I think it was a permission to love yourself. A permission for me to love myself enough. Everyone giving you that hug with warmth, bodily warmth, and more importantly, emotional warmth. It's just that they're giving you their love, and that's opened up a part of me that loved myself enough to answer that question, like, why am I doing this? And for, if nothing else, because the love within me is so strong that I want to celebrate it by climbing, continuing my climb.
Yeah. So I have to ask you, why did you think about climbing a mountain in the first place?
Well, definitely I wanted to challenge myself, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to reach a higher sense of meaning unless I've gone through a deeper level of darkness. And that climb, that summit day, definitely took me to a deeper place of darkness where even any kind of, as I mentioned, my determination or the want and the desire to grow, even that dissipated, and I was deeper than I've ever been. So I sunk so deep, and then because of that, hitting the rock bottom, then jumping from there, I was able to springboard up to a new meaning, a new place that I haven't been before.
So did anything about the journey surprise you? Like, is there something about yourself that you were surprised to learn along the journey up and down the mountain?
The up until that point, I was just focusing on my own preparation and my own pace and how am I going up. And I didn't want or need or think that I would ever need the support from the group. I was just like taking care of myself. And that point just made everything different. We all have heard of the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. That was my visceral lesson on that mountain. And now it's now engraved inside.
Yeah. So I can see how that experience has just further solidified your approach to where you are right now about that relationship, about helping others. I mean, really being part of that group hug as you coach leaders, as you go into business. So instead of being, individuals on a journey, you are one collective group on a journey.
And to add to yes, absolutely. And to add to the point that or the question that you asked earlier about how did that change me as a leader, it changed my definition of leadership. And my own definition of leadership today is leadership is impact. Just one word, impact. But what does that mean? Impact could be intentional or unintentional. It could be positive or negative, narrow or wide, deep or shallow, short-lived or sustainable. These are just 6 dimensions of impact. And when I measure my impact, now looking back at the group, well, my impact was unintentional at the beginning, very shallow on everybody else. I was just caring for myself, right? Carrying my own self. Well, now as I think of leadership again, then the way I want to lead is by a wide, deep, intentional, positive, sustainable impact. And that's everything I do. And whenever I advise or coach leaders, I ask them, are you aware of your impact? What is your impact? And are you aware of it? And is it intentional to what you want to have? Because now everyone around us, we are impacting them, whether we realize it or not. Sometimes by doing or saying something, and sometimes by not doing or not saying something.
Yeah.
And that interconnectivity to the social fabric or organizational fabric or team fabric, wherever you are, you're impacting more than yourself. And that's the awareness that I'm getting from that summiting trip.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I love the reframe there that really is the role of leadership. And I think a lot of times the role of leadership gets confused because we're thinking impact requires outcome and numbers and things like that, and building something that is not going to last the generations. But to be able to, lean into the fact that a leader is a human and their goal is to help others achieve a greater level of productivity or impact or difference in the world. I mean, so I like that reframe that that leadership is about that one word, and that one word can be defined in many different ways. So would you do another mountain climb?
Absolutely. Would love to. But other than mountain climbs, I'm also exploring other things. Like I registered for my first triathlon. I haven't had a triathlon before, and I registered for an Olympic one. So I'm preparing myself for that. I want to explore the meaning and sense of commitment. I'm also taking flight lessons, and that soaring high, I believe, would also open a different way and lens of looking at the world. So that's something I'm exploring as well.
Hmm.
So some of the things on my plate.
So you obviously have an adventurous spirit about you.
Well, I like to experience the world, and yeah, I love nature in all of its aspects.
That's incredible. Oh man, I love those. I love the stories. I love to live vicariously through people who do really dangerous things. I am I am not one of those, um, but I enjoy talking to people who have really just conquered their fear, their anxiety of, or even like, I don't even know if I can do that, and just going out there and doing that. So hats off to you for conquering a mountain. I hear coming down is just as hard as going up.
It's actually more dangerous.
Because you're
70%
tired,
of
right?
uh, yeah, sometimes because you're tired, sometimes because you're less focused.
Mm,
70% of injuries happen when people are going down the mountain, not up the mountain.
yeah. Yeah. I'll leave that to you.
Yeah.
All right. So as we wrap up here, and I have a lot of topics I'd love to go ahead and talk to you about, but as we talk to leaders about what they're dealing with, what they might have that tension between how they show up in the office and how they lead, how they focus on impact. What can you impart on people who may be feeling that they need to be doing something else, or they're not really in the right place where they feel that they could make that impact? What's something that you can, maybe one of the questions that you've asked yourself, whether or not you've had an answer to those questions?
um, well, there's so many ways we can go about this, but maybe two aspects of your question. You said how leaders show up at the office, right?
Mm,
And this statement somehow triggers something in me, which is it's about how you show up, not how you show up in the office. And if you're showing up in the office differently from how you show up somewhere else, then ask yourself why and where am I being authentic and where am I being not?
mm, that's
So
good.
the authenticity is, I would say, like this might sound like a cliche, but I'll say it anyways. Authenticity is a key to happiness, satisfaction. Where can you be satisfied and be happy or enjoy your time when you're not being authentic? Is that possible?
Yeah.
If it's possible in one moment, is it possible on the long term? And what is eating at you as you're being unauthentic?
Mm,
And that's also connected to impact, which is to your leadership. What kind of impact are you having on yourself first and on others in any moment where you're not being authentic to yourself? And finally, in order for you to be authentic, you have to answer this question: what do I want? And it's a very hard question to answer. It's not easy because the world is more than happy and always ready, and with social media, even more, to tell you what you should want and how you should be and how you should act and what is the standard that you should measure yourself against. But you are a true leader of yourself when you quiet everything and you shut it out and you come back to yourself and ask yourself, what do I want?
Yeah.
You always find the answer with a very whispering voice at the beginning, and then it becomes louder and becomes a voice that is leading you in life in the most magnificent way.
Yeah. I think two things with what you just said. You mentioned authenticity. Well, another way to say that is, are you aligned with who you were created to be? So, is the way that you show up at home with your family, with friends, with your employees, with the organization, is it all aligned with who you are? So that's another way to say authenticity and being authentic, because that makes it really easy to show up and have impact. Is if this is just who you are.
Yeah.
And then you were talking about, you need to find out, you know, what you want. I think the danger with that is that even in a healthy world, what we want can change over time and through our experiences. So I'm just wondering if it's less about what you want and more about who you want to be. And I don't want to get all psychology foo-foo-y here, but if we're aligned and we're authentic to who we are, then what we want can change, um, because we're still who we are. We can still show up and make that impact wherever we are, whatever we're doing. So it gives us permission to change what we want, or to, once we've achieved what we want, now we can want something else and not feel like we're chasing something, but we're just going to that next version or that next season of wanting something different.
I love this nuance that you're introducing, and if I may bring some nuance from my side,
Absolutely.
that might maybe be a little bit different from what you mentioned, which is the answer. The question of the why is always the utmost governor or the master of the scene. So if somebody answers, um, who do I want to be, or who am I? No, actually, who do I want to be? Then the question is also why. Why do you want to be that? And
Yeah.
then the question after that is, what do you actually want? Um, so I see the why question at the top, and that's what drives the what do you want, and then how do you want to be with follow follow that. That just a different way of looking at it, but is
No,
not
that
one way.
why question is another $1 million question. I mean, why do we want what we want? Is it because we saw it on social media? Because we're trying to compete? Because we're trying to overcome? Because fill in the blank of why we want what we want. But to your point, you really need to ask yourself and sit with that question long enough to be able to figure out, is this the true why I'm doing this? I mean, did you decide to climb a mountain? Was the right why the motivation? It sounds like you maybe had a different why than when you came down. That why may have shifted a little bit, but our motivations of why we do things is the tell of what we need to focus on, what we need to let go of, what we need to, what's going to bring us into that next season as we move on this journey from where we are to where we truly feel that we're called to be. So
Yeah.
thank you for the clarity on that, because that was a very important part that uh, I did not include. So
No, thank you for being open.
hey, yeah, absolutely. Well, this has been great. I appreciate our conversation. I love your insights. I love the fact that you come at things with a different angle than some of the leaders that I've spoken to. So I definitely appreciate the time and for coming on here.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Steve, and to have this conversation. And thank you so much for having me.
If today's conversation resonated with you, don't let it end here. Visit craftedclarity.net to explore more conversations reflections, and resources designed to help you distill the tension between what you've built and what you're built for. You can explore the Still, a curated experience that helps you find the right conversation for the season you're in, learn more about leadership experiences and facilitation through the work of the distiller, or connect with me directly for a one-on-one conversation. But whatever you're navigating, you don't have to distill it alone. And remember, clarity isn't found, it's crafted.